Paranormal is often described as beyond scientific explanation. Well, we have a couple of authors who certainly know exactly what it means, or definitely what it means to them. They are authors who will be participating in this year's Sunshine State Book Festival here in Gainesville, Florida on this Halloween. They are going to talk about their books, the spooky and some of it's kind of funny. Both of them are paranormal authors, Marie Q. Rogers and Jess Elliott. Ladies, thank you so much for being a part of Authors in Conversation.
Well, thank you for having us.
So, well, always, it's always interesting to find out how do you find your voice and in what genre. So, I'd like to hear from both of you on how you found your voice in the paranormal.
Pat,
Okay.
you want to go first?
Okay. Well, actually, I had this story that I told to my brothers and sisters when I was a teenager. And through the years, it kind of, it changed and evolved. And finally, when I retired, I sat down and wrote it. And by then, um, the story had formed into it's a girl from Earth who gets transported to this planet where everybody is psychic.
Hmm.
And she has latent psychic abilities that she's always trying to uh, trying to hone and improve, but she feels very much out of place. It's a coming of age story, among other things. Um, uh, it just evolved that way. Um,
So, your mind and your imagination has always worked that way.
yes,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Now,
Jess?
not
Sorry.
everything I write is paranormal, but these books are the character and the planet where they live. People are have paranormal powers.
And that's always fascinating to me because I've written a book on forgiveness, but it's based on my life and other people's experiences, and so that the mind takes you to these other places, and then you can develop characters, you can develop plots. It's
Mhm.
quite interesting. So, Jess, how did you come about that?
Uh, Gosh, I've got a couple of different. I'm kind of like Pat in the way that the first ghost story that I wrote sort of lingered in my head for a long time. I worked in a doctor's office, and one day the nurses were all just whispering about somebody. And the gist of it was that this patient was coming and she was schizophrenic, but she complained that her house was haunted by something malevolent. Well, I find it kind of upsetting because I do believe in ghosts. That if you look at the medical code book, like the DMSR, whatever it's called, that if you start telling a doctor that you're seeing ghosts, they're going to start analyzing you and prescribing you antipsychotics and stuff. You got to be really, really careful. But I thought, well, what a horrible situation if her house truly was haunted by something malevolent and nobody believed her. And that bothered me so much that it took me the longest time, but I finally created a story. And it's the only one I've done where it's funny and scary at the same time, because my narrator is basically modeled after Gladys Kravitz from Bewitched, who's just a busybody, and she doesn't even know what she's saying, but she's describing all these things, and she's funny, but what she's describing is not funny. So I was really pleased with the way that one came out. The
Well, go
I'm
ahead.
doing a current one that this is totally different. This is it's, let me see if I can get this up there. Can you see
Say
it?
the title because we can't see it very well. There it
Okay.
is.
Jiko Buken came about a couple years ago when I found out I lived in Japan from 90 to 93 teaching English. And only recently I found out there was a documentary about a guy who, in Japan, you can get cheap real estate. If you want to live there cheaply, you can go to these special realtors who will sell or lease properties that are stigmatized. And the problem is they are so superstitious about a house that something bad happened in that they can't resell it because nobody wants to live there. So it gets reduced on the market until somebody can legitimize it by staying there long enough. And then once they leave and everything's clear, then the price can go back up and we forget about the stigma. So this guy spent a year living in different haunted places that he paid virtually no rent for and did a documentary about it. And so the concept of Jiko Buken is a house with history. But in my story, the girl is from America and her Japanese isn't quite that good. So she thinks she's getting a historic house, not a house with history. And that's the whole gist of the problem, is that she's so excited to move in and she doesn't quite know why it's so cheap, but she'll find out.
So I used to like watching Bewitched, and what was her aunt's name that always did the spell, but she couldn't figure out how she
Right.
did it. Uh,
And Dora was the mom, right? I can't remember who the aunt
but Agatha.
Tabitha, maybe. No, Tabitha was the
Tabitha
daughter.
was a little girl.
Tabitha was the
But
daughter.
maybe if we, because it's said that with our breath, that's the most important thing we have, and the literal translation in Hebrew for the breath is spirit. Then in the scriptures, it says we must worship the Creator in spirit and in truth. And maybe if we thought of ourselves in a different way and demystified this, and maybe we would understand the significance of the powers that do exist and not be afraid. What do you think?
Yeah.
Works for me.
Yeah.
Part of my interest in getting into ghosts was that it was sort of a sideways spiritual path.
Uh-huh.
I felt like the bat phone to God wasn't really connected, but if I could prove that if ghosts existed, then there was something after death. And if there was something after death, that kind of opened up a door to all kinds of possibilities to me. It was like, okay, so God and I are not having a great relationship right now. I'm not sure he hears me and I sure can't hear him. But if I can know that ghosts exist, then maybe there is something, and then it's not quite so scary either that death is just the end, that there's something that carries on. So I found it kind of reassuring in a strange way. And
Mm-hmm.
when I was a kid, my folks said, "Oh, don't be stupid. Ghosts don't exist." And I felt like parents can be wrong.
Well, I think it's, and Josette Jenkins Golette says that that's how she sees it too. I've often wondered, and that's not what this show is about, but this is about meeting the authors, and we can talk about exactly whatever we want to talk about, right? So we're talking about the paranormal, and just kind of, I like the thought of demystifying what you all do and how you write, because those thoughts and the imagination is coming from somewhere.
Well,
Elizabeth Gilbert, I think, wrote, it was after Eat, Pray, Love. She did one called Something Magic. I think I've got it on the shelf. Where she said she feels like there really are muses or some kind of energies in the world that want a story to be told. And so you'll get the inspiration, but if you don't act on it in a certain amount of time, that it'll go to somebody else because they really want it to come out. And then somebody else might publish a story that's got the same plot, the same character names, the same something. And it's this weird, uncanny parallel. But if you weren't going to get on it, then it's going to somebody else. So you gotta go with it, which I think is really cool.
one interesting thing I found with my books, um, while I was writing these, I happened to come in this book on the Catholic saints came into my possession. And so I read it, and all of these paranormal abilities that the people in my books have already been known on earth as miracles that the Catholic saints were able to do. So, there is some basis in fact, if you want to call it that, for some of these paranormal abilities.
So tell us specifically about your book, Marie. You said that you don't always write about the paranormal. How many books have you written so far?
Um, well, these two, Trials by Fire and Quest for Namai, and then Season of the Dove, which is on Kindle Vella. It's there's no paranormal stuff in it, but it takes place 100 years in the future. And then I've got another one that I'm going to be putting on Vella. I've been working on this book for years. It's kind of a Twilight Zone situation. This man uh, is going to be renovating this old house that's been empty for 50 years, and it has the reputation of being haunted, but he doesn't believe in that nonsense. He finds a notebook in the house written by someone who had lived in the house, and it's weird. Nothing is making sense to him. And then the events in the notebook start bleeding into his reality, and his reality starts showing up in the notebooks. So that one's been fun, but I've been working on it for a long time. And then I'm also writing a prequel to these two books.
Tell people what a prequel is.
Oh, it's where you've written a series, but then you want to go back and write something before that, like Star Wars did. We started out with the movie Star Wars, and then they did two more, and then they went back and did prequels.
Hey, the other thing that I think that is interesting for those who watch and listen is how you get to the place of saying, I am going to write. I am a writer. And then, Jess, I want to get to your books. When did that happen for you, Marie?
Well, when I was probably 10, I
Hmm.
started writing, and I was just a kid, and it wasn't very good, and nothing really came of it. And then all through school and college, I had this interest, and I dabbled in writing, but I really didn't have the time and energy to get serious about it until my family was grown, and I was, you know, and I was retired. Finally, I had time to sit down and do something about it.
So,
But it's been all my life.
yeah, yeah. So, Jess, your book, or your books rather. So that your latest one is a little spooky and a little funny. Is that correct?
Jiko Buken is not so funny.
Well, is
Uh,
one of them?
I wrote a short story. The first short story that I published in my first collection of ghost stories, Ghost Light,
Hmm.
was the funny, scary one.
Well, what was funny, scary about it?
Just because the narrator is just this busybody, and she's just it's actually fun to perform. I've read it live a few times, and it's exhausting because she just babbles away and she has no idea what she's talking about. But she's talking to a new neighbor who's just moving in. The moving van is there in the driveway, and the more she talks about the house that he's moving into, the more he's thinking that he doesn't think he wants to live there. But she's just babbling away like, oh, la la la, waving a trowel at him, and it's very funny.
And then your latest?
Well, Jiko Buken is fairly serious. And in fact, this is a scary thing, this writing and serialization. I think I've written out episodes to get me to about January, and then after that, I don't know where it goes. I have about 3 potential different endings for it. And it's possible that my main character is a little bit on the psychopath side or sociopath side. She's a little insular. So I haven't decided yet just how crazy she's going to be. So that's kind of fun. So far, we're just laying down the groundwork of what she's walking into, but how she reacts to it and how it affects her, I haven't quite decided yet.
She'll decide for you.
Yeah.
She'll decide.
Yeah.
Yeah. the
Yeah,
character.
this is a weird thing. Pat just brought up something really cool, that while you're writing and you have a character in your head, if the character is real enough to you, then the character will tell you what they will or will not do.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yeah. In fact, I wrote this this is a funny book. Whoops. Paint Blue Christmas.
Uh-huh.
It's the third one in a cozy mystery series, and I had in mind that I was going to have, so it takes place at a meditation retreat with all these different cabins, and people can check in, and then crazy things happen. And I had in mind that
Please don't tell me that.
What? Why?
Please, yeah, because I want to go to a meditation retreat.
Well,
No,
I
go
had in
ahead.
mind
I'm just kidding.
this curmudgeonly couple was going to move in, and then they were going to meet this little girl, and she was going to get them so interested in being social that all of a sudden the woman would start baking cookies, and they would be inspired to join everybody else. And in my head, they got into the cabin, they checked in, they brought in their luggage, and then they closed the door. And I was like, well, you got to go meet the little girl. And I said, no. And I said, what do you mean, no? That's why you're here. You have to interact with other people. And they said, no. And I was like, okay. And I finally had to write them right back out again because they would not cooperate. It was the weirdest thing, but they were like, no, we're not, that doesn't make any sense. Why would we talk to that little girl? We don't know. We don't do that.
Yeah. Whenever I would get stuck when I was writing Season of the Dove, I get writer's block, I'd say, okay, guys, you take it from here. And so they'd start, going their way, and I'd follow and write. And then finally I'd get back into it.
So very interesting. So in that, when you are in this process of writing and editing, and people are making suggestions about your book, do your characters say, "Oh no, that's not going to happen"? They can't take that out.
Well, I haven't had them say that. I haven't had my characters say that to me. Mostly they tell me where they want to go, what they want to do. But
Okay.
I guess Jess has had a different experience.
No, no, no. What I'm saying is, let's just say I read your manuscript and I decide that maybe you need to change this or you need to change that. How
Oh,
do you feel about somebody else's edits to your
oh,
characters and your storylines?
well, that's being in a writing pod. That's what we get a lot. And what I do, I'll think about it, and I'll sometimes a lot of times I'll say, oh yeah, that's a good idea, and I'll accept it. And then other times no, that's not what I want, and I say thank you for the idea, but um, I'm going this other direction. It is my book, but these suggestions are always helpful, even if they're even if I discard them, they're still helpful.
Yeah. Jess, what happens with your characters when somebody is editing your manuscript?
Oh, I think generally speaking, being in a writing pod or a review group of any kind, not your friends, because your friends will just say, "Oh, it's great." Being in a review group, if they're not going to agree with you 100% on everything, and even with your friends who might say, "Well, I just didn't get it," you have to sort of sift through what feels right to you. If one person says they didn't get your book, like I had a mediocre review of one of mine, and I had to laugh because she read the whole thing and she confirmed what the book is about, but then she said, well, I wouldn't read another one. I thought, okay, but you okay, you know, you can't write to
Interesting.
please everybody because it's not never going to happen. But if you're in a review group and one person says, well, I thought this was unclear, but other people don't have a problem with that, well, you might look at it, maybe change something. But if 3 or 4 people get through a section and they say, I just really didn't understand this, I thought it bogged, or I need clarity, I'm not following, you have a problem. Because if you have that kind of consensus where people are agreeing, it's rough. It needs work, no question. But one person's opinion, maybe even two people, it's an opinion. Take it or leave it. Don't let it affect you. Yeah.
Marie and Jess will be a part of the Sunshine State Book Festival, which is part of the projects and works that the um, Writers Alliance of Gainesville sponsor every year. This is their fourth year, and Marie is actually the chair this year. Why is this so important to the works that you all are doing in bringing readers and writers together?
Well, people, when I was a kid, I didn't know that people wrote books. I thought books were just, part of the
Hmm.
background, just like everything else. It was just there. And then when I got introduced with Laura Ingalls Wilder's books, and I realized she'd been a little girl. She grew up to write books. People like that write books. So we want to bring it to other. It was. It's always so good to meet someone who actually does this, and we want to bring it to children so that they can see that, hey, yeah, maybe you can do this too, and also adults. They're going to be more interested in reading if they meet some of the people who actually do the writing.
Well, that's really interesting that you say that. You froze there for a second. That we many people don't think about the humans behind the pages, and that is what is so exciting about the Sunshine State Book Festival, is to be able to connect with the readers. And what is that like for you, Jess?
It's a lot of fun. In fact, one of the you know how sometimes you kick yourself that you just were too boggled at the moment to really follow through on something. At the very first Sunshine State Book Festival that I attended, this very eager man came up to my table, and I was trying to be chatty. I said, well, what do you like to read? And he pointed to my book, and he said he wanted it. And I was like, okay. Well, I was thinking that, well, cozy about a woman, it was more towards women. And I certainly wasn't expecting this sort of youngish man to go for it. And then I said, well, who should I make it out to when I was doing the autograph? And he said, his name. And I thought, wow, how did you? I mean, he walked directly up to my table. He was very firm about wanting that book. And I wished, I was just sort of starstruck, like, what? I wish that I had asked him more questions about how did he find me, and how did he hear about it, and what, and I would love to know where he is, because I've written two more and I was hoping he'd come back. So
Well,
yeah, it's very, very exciting when you can meet somebody who gets what you're writing and likes it, or that you can see that spark of excitement when you describe the book to them.
mhm.
That makes all of the struggle worth it.
Well, also, I think that, and that's one of the reasons that I thought it would be great if we could do these interviews with the various authors. There are going to be 150 authors there. We won't have interviews with all 150, but the ones that we do have, I think it will. It's like when you go to a movie or to a play and you already heard the soundtrack. Don't you feel closer to it
Mm-hmm.
when you can kind of sing
Mhm,
along? I hope that's what these
mhm.
interviews will do for um, those who are coming to the Sunshine State Book Festival, with writing and readership in some spaces, like the newspapers going down. How is it that authors are still motivated to keep writing?
Well,
It's a
uh,
need.
yeah, yeah, we have stories inside us, and they got to come out. It's like being pregnant, and that baby's got to come out.
So,
Good
Jess, you
analogy.
said it's a
It
need.
is that way.
Hmm.
So, when you say it's a need for the writer, or it's a need for us as humanity, society?
Both.
Yeah,
Both.
I'd say both.
Yeah. People have been telling stories since there have been people,
Right,
as far as we
right.
know.
Right. And so with social media, and do you think that we're going to see a shift with the help of groups like the ones like the Writers Alliance of Gainesville and across the country, who still provide this avenue for local writers and writers from across the country, because they're going to be people from other states that are at this festival also. Um,
Mhm.
do you think we're going to see a shift perhaps? Like, remember when they pulled up all the railroad lines and they made walking trails? And now, with all of the transportation, all of the 18 wheelers that are on the roads now, everybody wants the rails back, but it's too late. But do you think we're going to have a shift in this with reading? Maybe because we had to go online with COVID and children are sick of looking at an iPad.
That's a
Well,
tough question. Go ahead.
for a while there, go ahead, Jess.
No. I could see arguments both ways. It seems like on the one hand, you have a lot of people who brag that they don't read, and books seem to be in jeopardy, and yet we still have these events and people come. The local Friends of the Library book sale still has people down the block when it opens. I don't know.
Well, for a while there, they thought that print books were going to disappear. Everything was going to be electronic. But there are a lot of people, they want a book they can hold in their hand and read, and not on a Kindle, but a real paper and print book. There's a different relationship to it.
Well, of course, I totally agree with that. And I think that the more we share this with children, I certainly encourage every adult that has any children in their lives. As a matter of fact, with tonight being trick or treat, there was a lady collecting books at the Gainesville, at the Friends of Library book sale. She was collecting books because that's what she was going to give out tonight, today, this afternoon, instead of candy.
Good, good.
Isn't that wonderful?
There are a lot
Yeah.
of kids that don't have books. It's nice to put one in their hands.
Right, right. And for the adults that are in their lives to take time to stop and to read with them. Ladies, what do you think, as far as the books that you write? How do you see them helping to shape the thought process, or do you think about that? Do you just write your stories, or are you aware of how it may shape one's thoughts or feelings about your topics?
Pat, you want to go
Um,
first?
sure. It it stimulates the imagination, especially books like we write or science fiction books. It stimulates the imagination. Um, maybe something you never thought about. Historical novels also, they can see a window into the past that they didn't get from school.
Cool, 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 cool,
Just
cool, cool.
talk
Yes.
too much.
Okay, okay, that's okay. Oh,
Um, well, this relates more to my funny books than to the spooky books, but I several years ago I got very interested in Buddhism, and then I thought, well, okay, there's 1,000 how-to books on meditation or mindfulness, but to actually see it in somebody's life, I was like, well, I'd like to read a cozy mystery or something that's funny that has Buddhism in life. And so I started looking, and I was like, I think there were 3 authors that were writing Buddhist fiction at the time, but they were all sort of dark and gritty. And I was like, well, how about something funny? And I thought, well, if I can't find it, then I'll write it myself.
well,
Mhm.
that space is so like very sacred, and like there can't be anything funny happening, but it has to, right? Where did
Well,
you
yeah,
find
I
some
mean,
humor?
taking away any religious aspect of Buddhism, just looking at practical, like how to control your thought and how you react to stuff, I thought, well, this is perfect to have a character that gets bombarded with problems all the time and has to deal with them from a Buddhist perspective. And it would be funny because everybody suffers from problems of all kinds of things that trip you up all day. But then you get to sort of laugh as she deals with it. So,
So allowing people to think past the 3D, allowing people to move past what they see every day. And then not only that, but to embrace some thoughts that they may have, that they may be thinking, I'm thinking some stuff that's pretty out there. But Marie and Jess, what you're saying is embrace it. You're okay. Or write
absolutely.
it.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that because I just wrote an essay not long ago about how I feel a complete affinity with Shirley Jackson, who has to be one of the weirdest writers. And she died in August, and I was born in September. And like you were saying before about that, we all share the same air eventually, and maybe there's some molecule. I really have this fantasy that some little fraction of Shirley Jackson found her way to me because I totally get her. I absolutely love her. And yeah, she's weird. I found We Have Always Lived in This Castle in ninth grade, and it changed my world. It got into my DNA and it warped me, and I've never been the same since.
Okay, cool, cool.
Mhm.
Ladies, this has been just wonderful conversation with you all. I do appreciate it so much. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for sharing your thoughts via the books that you're writing and the conversations that you're sparking through the works that you do with other people who are deciding to allow their imaginations to be put on paper and published and shared with the world. So thank you both very much.
Well, thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you for having us.
I'm looking forward to meeting all of you at the Sunshine State Book Festival. I've written a book called The Art of Forgiveness. I'll be one of the authors there. Hey, maybe y'all can interview me, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That festival is going to be on the 28th. The authors are going to be arriving in town on the 22nd, but it's open to the public on the 28th at Trinity United Methodist Church here in Gainesville, Florida. I thank you all so much for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe and like, and we look forward to your comments on Facebook, like, and share so that and LinkedIn as well, so that we can continue to help to promote this beautiful art of writing, of storytelling, and then for the readers to enjoy a perspective that they may not have thought about and that may inspire them, where bringing the reader and the authors together is what the Sunshine State Book Festival is all about. Thank you all for joining us. We will see you tomorrow with more authors on authors and conversation. I'm Pamela Marshall at the Wellness Radio TV and at the Wellness Radio TV podcast. Remember, there is healing at the well. Make it a fantastic moment. We'll see you next time.